Has anybody played Symphony of the Night? Yeah, Castlevania, one of the many venerable old game series that Konami has been doing their best in the past few years to crap all over. Symphony of the Night was originally released on the PS1 and is one of the few Castlevania games that is not very easy to abbreviate. There's Dracula X, DX, Aria of Sorrow, AS, Dawn of Sorrow, DS, and even Harmony of Despair, or HD. And it was a nice trend we had going for a little while that Konami was naming their new Castlevanias after the system they were on. Dawn of Sorrow being the first game on the Nintendo DS, and Harmony of Despair being the first one presented with HD graphics. But, well, that's the nicest thing you're going to hear from me about Castlevania HD, and don't get me started on it right now. I've only just managed to replace everything I broke the last time somebody got me started on it. So yeah, Symphony of the Night sits awkwardly next to its stablemate Circle of the Moon in terms of abbreviation. The best I can think of for either would be Satna and Katma. Not quite as pithy as dicks or ass above, but it'll do. Enough about the title though, let's talk about the actual game. Symphony of the Night has a plot, I guess. I mean, every Castlevania has a plot, but it tends to just boil down to Dracula's back, go kill that guy. Talking about the story in Castlevania is a lot like talking about the story in a Zelda game. There are slight changes from title to title. Sometimes you've got a flute, sometimes the entire world is underwater, and sometimes you're a furry. But it always just boils down to, if Ganon reaches full power, the entire world is doomed! But you have infinite time before he does gain his power, so feel free to do some fishing minigames and don't sweat it too much. Well, Castlevania is all that except replace Ganon with Dracula and fishing minigames with whacking every solid wall you see with a whip, because you never know where the Lord of Darkness might have chosen to hide some yummy pot roast. The Castlevania games take place in some bizarre universe where the family that, for generations, has made it their job to beat down Dracula every time he pops up like some sort of decades-long game of whack-a-mole, finds a whip to be a more devastating weapon than, say, a halberd, or maybe a sharpened piece of wood. Of course, in Symphony of the Night, you don't play as any of the aforementioned kin, and there's nary a whip in sight. Not one that you can use, anyway. No, in this adventure you play as Alucard, whose given name is not such, but being the vengeful half-human son of Lord Dracula, he seems to think that the best way to get back at his dad is to adopt his name but backwards. Well, that and storming his castle to kill all of his friends. At least I assume all the skeletons, werewolves, and demons that hang out in Castle Dracula are the ruler's friends. Either that, or in big spooky castles like this, monsters just sort of grow out of the floor. Then again, that's literally what the zombies do in this game, so hush my mouth. As mentioned above, there are no whips in this game, proving that not even Dracula is too special to be killed by some good old blunt force trauma to the head, and also that the Belmont family are apparently all the Castlevania universe equivalents of people in real life who play Dark Souls using Rock Band controllers. Alucard has access to all manner of more practical weapons, from short swords to long swords, knives to boomerangs, and even some shields that don't work. Seriously, I don't know what the shields in this game are meant to do. When I found out you could have an on- and off-hand weapon equipped simultaneously, and one of the earliest things you pick up is a leather shield, I was pumped because I figured it meant I could play the game like 2D Dark Souls, but that's clearly not the case. I approach the skeleton of the moment, raise my shield prepared to tank a blow, and what happens next is the shield just falls out of Alucard's buttery hand and the little man himself goes flying backwards a good 10 or 20 feet. This leads to one of my biggest complaints about the game. Not the shielding mechanic that doesn't seem to do anything, but the gosh darned bloody knockback. I think they included it in the name of tradition, and it made sense, as infuriating as it was, in the early Castlevanias because there was a lot of precision platforming with stiff jumps, and the games were designed with that classic Nintendo hard playstyle in mind. Symphony has little to no platforming and literally no bottomless death pits, though. So Alucard being flung a meter or so backwards whenever he so much as stubs his toe is not really an added challenge to the game as much as it is a massive pain in the ass. And there's no special item to be found that might keep his feet rooted to the floor either. There are some, although thankfully few, rooms in the game where as soon as you enter you can get hit by a projectile attack that sends you bouncing right back out into the previous hallway. Usually, these rooms contain a platoon of snipers conveniently placed behind an enemy with melee attacks, so you have to try and chip away at him while the jerks behind him keep acting like bouncers at an upscale nightclub to which you showed up in a Zelda t-shirt, that is to say, violently bent on keeping you out. So, I have my complaints about Symphony of the Night, and it would be remiss of me not to mention one more before the end of this video, but I feel I should clarify that I do like the game. It works extremely well with the growing stronger principle, being that A, it's an RPG, and Alucard literally grows stronger as you play, and B, Dracula's castle opens up very gradually and organically as you acquire new movement abilities, requiring that you constantly backtrack, rechecking every single room to see if it's where you're supposed to use your new wolf transformation power. Which might sound tedious, but it also gives plenty of opportunities for revenge against enemies who, just a few levels ago, were feeding you your own buttocks with a side of rice. Now, I figured I'd get in that touch of positivity before the Symphony of the Night fan club figures out where I live and comes by to set fire to everything, but I did say I had another complaint, and I do. The difficulty curve is off, to say the least. You start off full of power and swathed in the baddest of equipment, but before you can even kill 3 enemies, Death shows up and is all like, "You here to see your old man?" "Well, actually, I'm here to kill him." "Well, good luck with that," and he takes away all of your equipment and abilities. It's a fitting start for the first Castlevania game to embrace what has come to be known as Metroidvania, and after punching a couple of skeletons back to death, you'll find a short sword that makes things a little easier, but only so much. The goal in designing a game should be to have the level of challenge rise steadily along with the skills and abilities the player earns as they go through. And in RPGs, a player may be able to escape the curve slightly by doing some excessive grinding in order to be over-leveled for a bit, although a good game has ways of smacking you back into line when this happens, but Symphony of the Night works differently. For the first few hours, you're wandering blindly with nothing but a pointy stick and a cardboard cuirass, and you have to do the Dark Souls thing, moving slowly and approaching enemies strategically, baiting them into attacking before dashing away so you can get a feel for their moveset before actually trying to combat them. A couple of bosses later, though, and you're effortlessly hacking through skeletons like you're Bruce Campbell in Army of Darkness, and they are, well, the skeletons, funny enough. Guess that analogy was a bit more on the nose than initially intended. Well, anyway, just as I'm starting to fall asleep from tedium at how easy the game's gotten, exactly at the halfway point, enemies start dealing as much as half your health in a single blow, and it's back to feeling like Dark Souls, but more like a run where you never level up, as some people out there seem to do out of a twisted idea of what the word fun means. So I finished Satana somewhat recently. The final boss was kind of disappointing, but the game overall was fun. It got frustrating at times for sure, but it's the first game in recent memory, aside from another game I've made far too many references to already, that actually kept my mind occupied when I was away from it and made me want to power through and finish it. It's a well put together game loaded with a huge assortment of weapons and armors, and it has that quality where not every piece of equipment you pick up is objectively better than the last, but some of them contain special effects that can aid with diverse playstyles. It's a well-varied game, and enemies all have special strengths and resistances, which must have really bothered the team in charge of working those out when they found out that half of the enemies appear only once in a single room, rendering items like that Werebane sword practically worthless. But it also means that the obsessives who like knowing everything about a game can really get stuck in for a decent stretch of time. In summary, I recommend Symphony of the Night, but making the easy assumption that you don't have an original PlayStation lying around anymore, the game is also available for download on the Xbox 360, which of course makes the less easy assumption that you didn't immediately microwave your Xbox 360 to death as soon as the One was announced. But then maybe it's available on the One as well. I wouldn't know because I wouldn't touch one of those things with a 10-foot pole being held by somebody else who's also wearing rubber gloves coated in Purell.